Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to Mercy Unbound. It's a show and series that aims to provide hope, an avenue for healing, and one that will help you better understand and then live the great mercy of God. With me today, I have a special guest, originally from the country of Colombia, Marino Restrepo. I hope I say that correctly, Marino. You have an amazing story. You were born in a rural area of Colombia, moved to Bogota when 14 years old. You married at age 20, moved to Germany, and then found your way to the United States. For many years, you lived in the fast lane during the 60s and 70s, the hippie days, a lifestyle far from God. You involved in all the drinking, the drugs, the sex, everything you can imagine. On a trip back to Colombia many years later, you were kidnapped by the rebels, and during that frightening time, had a mystical experience with our Lord. And we're going to talk about that today. And we're also going to I want you to just share your experiences, but a lot of this is in your book, From Darkness into the Light. And it's an interesting cover because it's the jungle, and you can see the light coming through. This book is a very good read, and it's available at Amazon.com. Marino Restrepo, Restrepo, From Darkness into the Light. Marino, share with us your early years in rural Colombia. I actually went to Colombia several years ago. The World Congress on Divine Mercy was held in Bogota, and beautiful city, beautiful country, beautiful people. You were in rural Colombia and then you went to the city. Tell us a little bit about growing up in your early years.
I grew up in a beautiful environment. We have in Colombia 3 chains of mountains that come all the way from the south, the Andes Mountains. And one of them goes towards the west, and that's the one I was born on, and it's called the Eje Cafetero, which means is the area of coffee growers, many mountains planted in coffee. And I was born in a coffee ranch plantation. All my grandparents from both mother and father, they had large farms, of coffee. And also they had cattle and different things, but mostly coffee. So we were raised in the countryside, big houses, big families. We were 10 in my family, but my uncles and aunts, they had 15, 20 children each. So we were a very large family. And we had a happy childhood. I used to horseback to elementary school, from the ranch. And instead of parking lots, we had the stables in front of the school. It was really good. We were natural polo players because we kick a rock all the way from the ranch up to a town. We were experts. So I had a happy childhood, a Catholic childhood. We were all Catholics in that town. We were 40,000 people in that town. Everyone was a Catholic. Actually, in those years in Colombia, people didn't know about other religions. We didn't have any other religions. They began to appear with the hippies in the 60s, later on. So I grew up in that type of environment. We were always in a family circle because we were too many. And obviously, school in town, we mingled with everybody else, and we had a good social life. It was pretty healthy then, very good living. We're very Spanish. All our teachers were from Spain. We had only male schools and female. They were not mixed, and we were all descendant of Spanish people. Both our parents are Spaniards. So that was basically my life there. It was I would say happy childhood, a happy early teens. And all evolved around the church, around a very religious type of life, and also fun, lots of fun. Yes.
Now, then you moved to Bogota. Why did your family move at that time?
I was 14 years old. That was 1965. And I moved to Bogota. And when I got to Bogota, I was really surprised to see so many hippies from the US. They were, draft dodgers, they were all running away from the Vietnam War. So many of them. And they were beginning to come to Bogota. Bogota was becoming popular in California, especially. And for some reason. So they were living around the city in the mountains. They were renting farms and they had like communes and things like that. So very soon I got engaged in this kind of culture of the 60s because it was all over town. And then, I mean, that was fast. Very soon I had a rock and roll band, and I was testing all kinds of drugs and all this free, life, free love, and so all these things that came along with the package.
You had a couple of girlfriends you mentioned in the book, I think Donna and Cindy.
Yeah.
They introduced you to the fast life, and one of them died of an overdose, didn't they eventually?
Yes, she did. Yes. Both girls, beautiful girls, wonderful people, wonderful human beings. Obviously, the culture of the 60s was very destructive because of the drugs. If it wouldn't be because of the drugs, it would have been much different. But the drugs really took a toll on all of us, and especially some didn't make it, like this friend of mine. So I had a relationship with these two girls in particular, and also many others, but these two are like the center of the whole thing. And I learned a lot of good things from them, but at the same time, we were living a very decadent life, promiscuous. So that part was very dark. And to me, it was really shocking because I came from a very orthodox, conservative life. And to see that was very difficult. I was really scared in the beginning, but since the girls were so beautiful and they were so happy, and I was learning so much from them because I was just a small town boy, like everything was new, and they were from big cities in the US, so they were way ahead of me in what the world had to do. And so I was fascinated, but scared with especially the sexual life and the way they handle it. But well, that's the way it happened, and I got really engaged in that culture.
Now, you eventually met a woman. She became pregnant. You moved to Germany. You had mentioned about you perhaps had contemplated an abortion, but she kept the child. Did that little child change your outlook on life at that time, or were you still so immersed in the fast lane that you just stayed in the groove and the rut?
Well, how my roots, from home were still there. Also hers, because she came from a pretty orthodox family. And so that saved us because on one end, we wanted the abortion, and on the other, we were scared of it. And we wanted to stay in the fast lane so that the child will stop us from a lot of things. So it was like an obstacle at first. But then appeared the opportunity to move to Germany. And then all of that was kept in the back. And we moved to Germany. She was pregnant. And we continue on with her pregnancy, no questions asked. The next thing we knew, he was born, and we were in love with the boy. And then things changed. We didn't even think about it. 18 months later, we had the other boy.
Now, you were involved in the arts and eventually found your way to the US, but what was your life like at that time?
Well, when I moved to Germany, I moved to Hamburg. And same culture was taking over there, the youth. So my university campus was a university of hippies, even the teachers, everyone. So I continue on in that type of life. There was no change. And I already had that spirit of the culture. So I didn't have like a big change of culture when I went to Germany, though the language was very difficult for me. I spent like 18 months just learning the language, and you know, Germans are perfectionists, so it was hard to pass the test. But in the meantime, I was learning a lot of new things and raising the children. And so my university life was very entertaining. I was very busy, uh, and we will travel a lot because part of the spirit of those years were traveling. It was like you know, moving from one place. So we went all over Europe with the children and the little Volkswagen car. And then in 7 years later, I moved to California, to Los Angeles. And that's when I began the other phase of my life, you know, because very soon I separated from my wife. And so I stay in California and she went to Colombia.
And what was your life like at that point in time in California?
Um, well, now there were changes because though a lot of the people I met in California were also hippies, they were more moderate because they were working and they were in a professional life. I came from a student life and we didn't need to care so much about many little things that they did in California when they were already working in a professional life. So I had to do some changes, a lot of changes. And so that wasn't difficult to do because I had two children. I needed to work, make a living, and make sure I was providing for them and all of that. So I began working first in the music industry, uh, and I began joining bands and joining all kinds of castings for musicals, and I ended up in New York a few times in off-Broadway shows, and then I was always working on demos for big record companies, and finally I team up with a guy from Colorado that was a famous bass player. His name is Kenny Passarelli. At that time, he was the bass player for Elton John, and we became friends. And we made some bilingual type of demos and sent them to New York to Sony Music, that was known as CBS Records then, and they signed us. Was a big surprise. A few months after we sent the demo, they called us. They met us in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and signed us to the company for 4 albums. And they called the band Santa Fe. And that's how I started my music life career. And I began traveling the world, doing, you know, concerts and releasing records. And I based myself out of Los Angeles. So I got engaged in the industry there with the screenplay writing, and I will work on and off. Friends of mine will have TV shows or something, and I will act here and there, not in a big time acting, but I will be involved in the industry all the time, you know.
Was that difficult with you had the boys? Wasn't
No,
that difficult?
my wife had the boys,
Oh,
but
she
my
took them to
boys,
Colombia. Okay.
yeah, but my wife was from a political family. So when she came back to Colombia, she got engaged with her family in politics. And then one of her cousins was kidnapped by Pablo Escobar, the criminal, you know, the narco terrorist. And so they were going to kidnap my children also. And my wife sent them to me to California. And since then, they stay with me. They were only like 11 years old, 12. And so they stay with me from there on because my wife showed up like 2 years later with cancer.
Oh,
And
yes.
she lasted only a few months. And so my sons, I raised my sons from that time on.
I see. Now, let's fast forward many years to 1997. You decide to go back to Colombia. What happened?
Okay. At that time, I was what we can call in the peak of my career. I was totally involved in this new age life constantly since my teens. I never stopped that. I continue on a magical tour, and I was fascinated by that. And then I went to Colombia during a Christmas in '97 because within the 4 years prior to the Christmas, we had lost like 5 people in the family, one after another, many funerals. First, my wife died to cancer. Then my younger brother died in an accident in the Caribbean Sea. He disappeared in the sea. We never found his body. Then my father passed away. Then another brother of mine committed suicide in Bogota. And then 3 months later, my mother passed away.
Mm.
So that Christmas, we were four sisters and me left. And my sisters were, doing a closing to all these deaths, and they were really sad. It was
Wow.
difficult. I unfortunately was very involved with Hinduism, and I believed in reincarnation, and I had a different closing to the party of my family, so I didn't even speak to my sisters about my philosophy, but they thought I was still Catholic because I spent most of my life away from home. So they really didn't know. The only one that knew was my mother, and my mother never told them. So that's how the whole thing started that led me into this mystical experience we're getting into.
Yeah. So you go back to Colombia to see your family, kind of give them support. You've been the away brother for years, and then what happened on Christmas Day?
Well, my sisters were under the impression that I was still a Catholic. So they invited me to church to pray the Divine Infant's Christmas Novena. This is a very old Catholic tradition in Colombia. And I went to church with them just to please them because I didn't want to explain to them that it had been 33 years since I didn't walk into a Catholic church. They would have been panicking. But so I went along with them. And when I got to church, that was the 16th of December, the first day of the novena. The priest introduced the novena, saying that he who prays the novena with devotion and faith, the baby Jesus will grant him a grace. And we could place our intentions mentally. So I said to myself, maybe I can get something out of this, because I was an opportunist, as worldly as you can get. So I said to myself, I'm going to ask this novena to grant me a change of life. And I had a list of things I wanted to change, obviously they were mostly greedy things, and I had little idea I was actually talking to God, and the baby Jesus changed my life that Christmas. It was very clear later. It wasn't clear then, when it happened, because I was not in the faith. So I didn't put one and one together. But actually, this happened because God walked into my life, So this novena begins on the 16th of December, ends on the 24th at midnight mass. And I went along with every day to the novena with the mass. And Christmas Day, I was driving to a coffee ranch plantation of one of my uncles. I was going to spend the night there. And that's when everything started. I was driving through the gate of the ranch, and 6 guerrillas from the FARC rebels of Colombia, they jumped out of the woods with machine guns and kidnapped me. They tied my hands in the back, put a hood over my head, and took me prisoner to the jungle and put me away in a cave.
How many hours away were you from where you talk about an old dilapidated house, but were you quite a distance from the jungle, so to speak, or not?
No, that place was already in the jungle, the cave they put me away. I call it a cave because it turned into a cave. It had the aspect of an old abandoned hut, like,
Mhm.
and so, but it was covered up with all kinds of of bushes and things from the jungle, and the place inside was a hell, it was filled with spiders and bats and all kinds of bugs, and it was terrible. It's so inhumane they put me in there, but those people don't care. It was convenient for them because I couldn't, there was no way I could make it out of that place. And they kept me tied up and with the hood over my head. And they were freely walking around outside, waiting for another group of guerrillas that were in charge of picking me up and bringing me deeper into the jungle where nobody could find me. That was the plan, originally. Obviously, it didn't work for them because the army began looking for me. So the guerrillas that were supposed to pick me up, they couldn't move because those helicopters, they can see them moving, and so they would have been in trouble. So they kept me there. The guys that originally brought me there, they didn't bring any food because they were supposed to be there only for a few hours. But it took them 2 weeks to be able to move. Altogether, I was kidnapped for 6 months, but those first 2 weeks were in the cave. They will pull me out once a day to feed me with whatever they could find, wild roots, wild fruits, bad water, non-drinkable water they will bring me. I would know it just by the smell of it. And they will let me go in the bushes for the bathroom and stuff, and that will last probably an hour a day. And back in the cave, tied up and with a hood over my head. That was the routine for 15 days. And obviously, yes.
No, did you know the kidnappers? Didn't you recognize any of them?
No, because I didn't live in Colombia. I lived in
That's right.
California. Yeah, yeah. Those guys are like wild stallions from the jungle. They were from the small towns and they were criminals. Like killers. They were hired by the rebels. Most of them are just plain criminals, and that was the type of people they were. Really bad, really bad.
So you had to fear for your life, especially as time went on, because you weren't being released. And what was going through your head?
Absolutely panicking because I came from living in LA in a very safe environment, a glamorous life, so to say, and then that ended up in the jungle with these criminals, with machine guns and pistols and grenades and knives and threatening to kill you and pushing you around and telling you things, cursing you. So that was really like a nightmare. I didn't even think it was real, and so every day was harder, much harder. My heart was really corrupted with hatred, and I felt really bad, I'm feeling weaker every day. But then this whole thing took place on the day 15. Uh, I was there really. That was probably one of the worst days of day 15, and they pulled me out, and I was in the midst of a lot of guys that just arrived, and they gave me all the conditions of the kidnapping. They said I had to pay them a big ransom. They knew I had that money because they had studied me, they said, and which was true, ended up being true. And then also that if I refused to pay, they would kill my family. Also, that because the process of collecting the money was going to take a long time, I was going to end up seeing everybody's faces. So that automatically sentenced me to death. They didn't want me to come out alive from the jungle. So I was sentenced to death right there. So they put me back in the cave with the hood and tied up and told me that the next day they were going to transfer me somewhere else. So that night was the night I had the experience with God. I was in the cave, as you can probably imagine, absolutely destroyed, as a human being. No hope of making it out alive from the jungle. All the money I ever worked for, they were going to steal. All my family were in danger of getting killed. I mean, you couldn't be in a worse scenario like that in your life, destroyed. And then all of a sudden, being awake and conscious, I entered into an ecstasy. I was conscious of being in the cave, but something else was taking place. There was like a shifting, something where I was like in awe and I couldn't get off that state. It was very strange. So the only thought I had was, I'm dying, because I had been, through difficult times those 15 days, and especially the food and all of that, the poisoning from all these bites from the insects. And I said, I'm dying. That was the only thought that came across, because I felt the cave, I heard the noises, everything, but I was in a state that I had never been before, and something else was taking place. So all my attention was like open into, and now what, something like that. And then I found myself at age 3 in the inside patio of the house where I was born in my hometown. I was on a tricycle with a stick in my hand, going really fast through the gardens, hitting the plants and the flowers. And I could hear like a maid from the house that I even recognized the voice, that was telling me not to do that. And so I was even more scared, because it wasn't like I was in a movie. It was like I was on that tricycle and I was smelling the flowers. I was recognizing the maid that spoke to me. I was home. I was there at that age, but I was 47 years old that night. So my mind going through this, reliving my life, as we can call it, was with 47, regardless of the age I was going through. That made it very difficult, very complicated. And I continue on reliving my life little by little. By the time I got to age like 11, more or less, I began to go through the most excruciating pain, because, you know, 33 years I had been away from God in mortal sin. I had lost my fear of God. I I had no sense of sin whatsoever. Uh, so now my conscience was sleeping, and all of a sudden my conscience began to open, to wake up, and my fear of God came back like a storm into my heart. And everything that I was taught at school, in church, in the family about God came back also. And that produced me the most amazing pain, because I began to see all the sense of sin, and began to go through this experience of seeing this life that I have lived, but seeing it with the eyes of my new conscience, so to say. And age 47, at age 11, that was taking place. That's very complicated and very scary also. Though I couldn't tell you that I had fear, because at that time, during the whole time of the ecstasies, I didn't have the sense of fear. I had the sense of guilt, shame, mostly, but not fear.
Was there a presence of God at that point in time, or was that a little bit later? Or was the presence of God when it first happened?
The presence of God came along when I told you that I gained back my fear of God. At that moment, the presence of God was huge, because I was back into all of catechism, the masses, the prayers, the rosaries at home, all the processions in town. All of that was there like in a package at once, and my conscience was just melting all of that, and it was very complicated, everything, because it was happening at once, and my whole being was understanding it at once. It's something you couldn't explain well, in words, because it's another dimension, and I would call it like an illumination of my conscience. That's what it was,
Right.
and yeah, that's, so you couldn't give it another name. And so and it's very large, it's very long, because I go through like every aspect of my life, and sometimes I will see for a while like my school time and all the things that were taking place there, good and bad. And so that goes on and goes on and goes on until I think the age I had. And I think I went through my whole life. And then something more mysterious took place. I am already completely involved in this experience. I'm not even thinking anymore if I'm dying. I'm long away after that. I'm gone. I'm not in time because I'm outside time. So time is not happening. Though I'm living through my life, which was involved with time, but the experience is not in time. So that makes it very mysterious. Yeah. And so I appeared face down against the grass uh, in a pretty high mountain in the midst of the most incredible silence, a silence I never experienced before. I can only call it a perfect silence. And I look away and I could see another mountain even higher, far away. And the top of the mountain was covered with fog, and the fog began to fade away slowly. And this is like a state of awe. You can get off, but you are completely in awe, and things keep on unfolding and unfolding, unveiling. And then this fog fades away, and I find the most amazing city of light on top of the mountain. Though it was so far away from me, I could perfectly see it. And my soul knew I had to have been there and didn't make it. So that really troubled me. And I looked around to see how I can get there, but the two mountains were not connected. So that made it even more complicated. And being like that, troubled by this separation from my destination, I began to hear the sound of like big waters coming towards me, giant water sound, but I couldn't see the water, only the sound. And then that turned into like many voices instead of water, like voices. And then it turned into one voice that was coming from everywhere, eh, everywhere. Sometimes it seemed like it came from inside me also. It was coming, it's a voice that took over everything. It was coming from everywhere. And though I had been away from God for so long, and I had worshipped so many false gods, throughout my life, the moment I heard that voice, I knew it was God's voice. There was no doubt in me. And then I was felt with shame and guilt, and I just wanted to disappear. I couldn't bear with this voice of love, a love I never experienced before. Obviously, I had no love in me. That's the first experience I have about love. No love in me. And but the Lord kept me there. He didn't let me sink in that misery that I was, kept me there. And it spoke to me for a long time, at length. I tell people, if I live at 100 more years, I wouldn't be able to tell you, not even the minimum of what I experienced. But I was the most incredible voice. And he spoke to me about humanity from beginning to end, then about the Jewish people and how God prepared them for the incarnation and all the battles and all the trials and that went through in order to mold them. And it was a beautiful story, about the whole salvation, journey. And then he comes into this incredible part where he speaks about the new creation and new covenant in Jesus and how everything changes, the whole universe changes, everything changes. And then he placed me there in the church. And he said something with an incredible tenderness and love, but so much with a firmness that was really strong, because he said, the Catholic Church is my church. I chose you to be in my church since the womb of your mother, and you deserted it. But he didn't accuse me, which was, when I describe it, it sounds like an accusation, but it was not, because you will have to know his voice for me to understand what I mean. He was not accusing me, but he was showing to me what the church was, what it was about. And then with a more, and he said, the Catholic Church is an army, is an spiritual army, the army of God. Those were the words he used. And then he said, we are responsible for the salvation of all of humanity, Eucharistic instruments of reparation. And then he said, with so much love, he said, but salvation is for everyone. And like letting me know, salvation is not only for you, for Catholics, it's for all of humanity. Only that we are in charge of human salvation, of humanity's salvation through the Eucharist. So he places everything in the Eucharist and brings the Eucharist into an amazing level of power, the greatest power ever. And so he showed me the 33 years I was absent from the church and how much he could have done through me to save souls if I would have been taking communion. And that was even more painful. That was like every time I was going through this with the Lord, I was absolutely devastated, But somehow he was keeping me there so I could flow with all of this experience, because at the end I understand this was a preparation for what he had in store for me as a mission, later. Right. But at that moment I was suffering all of that, and so he took me through all the sacraments, and he gave me an amazing presentation of the sacrament of confession and priesthood.
It sounds almost like you had the salvation history explained, and then you had RCIA, the review of the faith, and you said you felt guilt and shame, obviously, because you were facing a God of love and mercy. And
yes, that was the most painful experience, was to get to be in his love, because I realized instantaneously that I never had love, because when I met true love, I know I don't know this love. I have never experienced it. I don't have a drop of it. And that love is so big. In spite of that, he wasn't dropping me, he was holding me, and that made it even more difficult, because the easy way was to disappear, but he didn't let it, he just kept me there. He held me there. And so the love was getting bigger by the beats. And so go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, you were like the woman at the well. He hates the sin, but he loves the sinner. And you were experiencing his love.
Yes, absolutely. Because I remember how I was able to experience, because I was not seeing him. I was just listening to him, to his voice. But the voice was like seeing him, because it will change, the attitude, the voice, the sound, everything changed depending on what he was saying. So, well, I guess that's what happens with a voice anyways. But anyways, when he spoke about salvation is for everyone, that was so huge, because it was very big. It's like, and he was coming from a Christian spirit, when he spoke like that.
Right.
He was Christ, I could almost see the cross, and Jesus on the cross when he said that. And then he spoke about priesthood, and he told me that there's no one on earth that Satan hates more than a priest, a holy priest. an obedient priest, because he insisted all the time when he spoke about priests, he will always say, holy priest, obedient priest, in order to understand the power a priest has through his anointing, right, as priesthood. And so he explained to me that Satan, he knew I had already the knowledge of who Satan was, because I just had my illumination of conscience.
Right.
And during that illumination of conscience, that obviously was a plan of God preparing me for this moment when he speaks to me. During that illumination of conscience, I had the opportunity to know evil and to see what evil had done in my life and my relationship with evil. So when he spoke to me, I was already aware of that. And that's why he was speaking in those terms. He was saying, Satan stole from me the church when he took away from me the sacrament of confession. And that's when I went to Bogota and ran into this hippie culture and I stopped going to church and never went back to confession. And then I became very weak spiritually, undernourished, because those were the terms he used. And the Satan filled me with the spirit of the world, replaced the Holy Spirit, so to say. And so he says, the sacrament of confession is the equivalent of an exorcism, because when we fall into mortal sin, we turn down our grace of baptism. We go back to where we were. And then when we go back to confession, we are renewed in the friendship with God, and we are exorcised from the demons we got from the sin. And so he shows me the power behind the sacrament that is amazing, and the importance of keeping our lives completely reconciled with God at all times, so that the devil doesn't have an entrance into our daily life.
One thing you mentioned about this evil, in today's world, many people doubt the existence of hell and purgatory. They think, oh, I've been a good person, I haven't killed anybody, so we all die and go to heaven. That's not the case, is it?
No, it's not the case. As a matter of fact, later on in this experience, I had a very difficult moment with the abyss, with hell. And I can go on and tell you that.
Please go.
Right? Yes. So, well, after that, he showed me the Eucharist and what happens on the altar when the Mass is being celebrated, the amazing light that lands on the altar, and how that light covers a big radio of souls around the church. And then he showed me how a Catholic that is well prepared for communion, after taking communion, you turn into a torch, a tower of light, and bring that light out of the church when you go away, and demons flee wherever you go, because he says all the activities of demon against souls during the Mass, they stop because they can't handle the light. They are blinded. So when you go out of the church after communion, you continue on spreading that light around and cleaning up the territory where you live and where you go. So it was so incredible. I'm just giving you a very poor presentation of what he said, but because what he said, it will take me a long time to explain, but it's more or less this, and it's so big. And also our responsibility as Catholics, being instruments of the Eucharist, reparation. And he shows me how every time we take communion, we are repairing and also rescuing souls. And so I appear in a lake with the water up to my waist. And I looked across and I could see a big rock, gigantic rock, precious. It looked like old gold, so that was the look of it. And on top of the rock on the right side, I could see the head of a man looking sideways. At first, I didn't know who he was. So I looked towards the water where I was, and I could see a mist floating on the water. When I looked at it closely, I realized It wasn't a mist, it was spirits, spirits of evil by the hundreds. And they were like bundles because I'm describing an ethereal realm. So they were not physical, but I could see them. They were like bundles. And when I looked at it closely to one of them, I saw my sin and I was right there. All my sins were alive. You know, they were the spirits of my sins of 33 years. I'm talking about my mortal sins. And that mist continued on towards an abyss on the left side of the lake. And when I looked down at the abyss, I could see how deep down I had fallen through my sinful life. And there were many levels of condemnation because I'm looking at hell. And I wasn't told that, but I knew that instantaneously. And if I would have died that night, I would have been condemned. And I knew where I would have ended up. Because there I could see very clearly how we have only two ways of living our life, our earthly life. We are either descending or we are ascending. There's no other way. There's nothing in the middle. You never stuck anywhere. You are either descending or ascending. And then I felt so trapped in that darkness, and I felt I belonged there, but I was looking for air, for light, for hope, for help. And when I looked towards the right, I could see the other side because I just saw the descending side. When I looked towards the right, I began to see the ascending side that begins with purgatory, you know, and that was a very difficult. First, I described to you the presence of demons like bundles, like slime. You know, that was the aspect of it, but in a misty type of feature, type of. That's the way I could see it because it will change, you know, but it will change according to the scene I'm looking at. So on the right side, I begin to see souls. They were not demons. That was a big relief because when you look at demons, you look at hatred, you look at something horrifying, you look at animal type of beings, you look at deformity, you look at something really gross. And looking towards the right where this purgatorial state began, which was the ascending side of life, there were souls that were very low, that were at my same level because I was in the lowest level. I was in what you could say the gate of hell. You know, that's what I was standing in the lake. So the souls that were at the same level I was, they were in the lowest level. They were in total darkness. But when I looked at them, since it was also an ethereal realm, they were not physical, but they were persons, and I could see them as persons. I could connect with their eyes, and their eyes were so beautiful and so filled with love. That was a relief from what I just had experienced on the left side. So, but it was very, it will be impossible to describe what I was looking at because every soul was going through a state of purgation, very different, and it will change. It will also change. Like I see some souls that looked like they were wrapped in gas, you know, like when you are wounded. Some of them will look a little bit like wood or metal or things like that, or really broken in pieces, but those pieces are floating together and made the person, but you could see the pain, and they were all resolving earthly life, all of them. But you could see how they were progressing towards the light. You know, they will go up. And then I look at the only light that was there, that was the head of the man on top of the rock, was the only spot of light. And I look up and I realize it was my guardian angel. He had been teaching me everything I described to you in the lake. He was the one teaching me all of that. He was not talking to me with a voice. He was teaching me all of that. I wouldn't be able to describe to you how, but I was understanding everything. So him and me were communicating perfectly, but not with a voice. And so he took me, I appear like as soon as I I realized who he was, all of that. I appeared in my hometown at age 11. And I was the main trumpet player of the school band. So I'm in a procession of Our Lady, the Virgin Mary, playing the trumpet. And behind four schoolmates of mine that were carrying a statue of Our Lady. And I'm there playing the trumpet. And after a while, Our Lady humanized. She was no longer a statue. She was walking in front of me. And I kept on playing the trumpet. And she had two children, one for each hand. So after a little bit, I realized the child on her right hand was me at age 7, age 7. So the angels explained to me that my mother had consecrated me in her womb to Our Lady. And Our Lady was never left me. She was always with me during all those years, all those sinful years. She never abandoned me. And then he showed me all the graces from the processions and the rosaries and the consecration to Our Lady, the novenas, all this relationship with her, how powerful it was, how demons will tremble against that how good that is, and how those processions through town will exorcise the whole town. And I could see, demons fleeing and things like that as he was narrating it. And then he spoke to me about God's mercy, this was precious. I was a trumpet player for 3 years, from age 11 through 14. That's when I left my hometown. And I played in many processions and many feasts of the church. Not because that was my intention, because the only reason I was in the band was to escape from classes. It's like had nothing to do with serving the church. But the angels show me how God is so generous, so incredibly merciful, and the only thing he wants is to save us, right? That he used those 3 years of processions where I played the trumpet, he used them as an economy of my favor, to protect me like a shield, to protect me from great attacks of the devil all those years that I was in sin. And so he showed me about that mercy of God, how he, for little things we do, the most insignificant things we do, God gives us big gifts of protection, and reparation. So I came back into the lake and the rock was filled with light. Now the whole rock lit up. And I knew that light is the same light that was on top of the sea, of the mountain in the beginning of the experience. I knew it was Jesus, but I knew I couldn't look at him. So I looked down towards the water, away from the light. But I felt a presence on the right side of the rock. And from the corner of my eye, I find out it was Our Lady again. And so I looked towards her, and I could see I was connected to her through an umbilical spiritual cord. And all my anguish, everything that was taking place in my heart from being in the midst of that darkness, from having seen hell, from all of that, was flowing through that cord towards her womb and from her into the light. And this went on for a while, like in a circle. And after a while, a big force pulled my head up towards the light, and I couldn't bend it down again, but I was blinded, totally blinded. And I kept looking. I had no choice. And little by little, I began to see the silhouette of Jesus. I could see him in the light, and I could see how he was rescuing me from the darkness, but everything was flowing through Our Lady into him. She was like an engine, there in the middle, generating all this force. And it was just incredible. I came off the ecstasies right there. And
Marino, how do people get a hold of you? What's your website?
my website is my name, marinorestrepo.com.
Okay.
And there you find all the information. Yes.
I know you speak at conferences and churches. And now, again, your book, From Darkness into the Light, Marino Restrepo. And just one last question here before we close out today's show. You've got an hour to live after this show. what words do you want to give the people of the world? What do you want to tell them?
Um, I think that the most important message I can share will be wake up. This life is too short and we need to be prepared, because I have seen something that we have been revealed to, that life goes on after death, and I have seen what happens afterwards. And it's very important to be prepared. Our soul needs to be strong. We need to have the light of God in our hearts, which means the love of God. And for that, we need to change our heart. We need to bring this amazing radical conversion to the heart to be ready. That's my best counsel, my best message.
Well, Marino, I want to thank you so much today for being with me and the audience on Mercy Unbound to talk about your story, your conversion, the mercy and love of God. Keep up the good work, people. You can reach Marino at marinorestrepo.com. You can get his book, From the Darkness into the Light, at amazon.com. And we've got a lot of work to do. The world's kind of lost right now. So keep it up. And I hope our paths cross again soon, Marino.
Yes, thank you very much. By all means, I look forward. Thank you
you
for the invitation, most kind.
Thank you.
God bless.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/drbrian, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbrianthatcher.com.